Hey guys, welcome back to Sage and Stone Homestead. If you haven't met me yet, my name is Heather and this is my raised bed garden. We have had the best garden year that we have ever had in the 4 summers that we've been growing here on this homestead. All of these peppers were harvested in one day, and it's gonna take me more than one day to put them away for the winter. But that's what this video is all about. First things first, we're going to be dicing up and freezing all of these peppers, and I'm gonna show you a really easy way to get it done very quickly. These down here are hot jalapenos. We do have a variety here of a heatless jalapeno, but for the hot ones, we're going to be making Cowboy Candy. It's a really interesting kind of condiment. And then with all of these sweet peppers, I'm gonna be actually pickling them so we can have them over the winter. Obviously, all throughout the growing season, we will eat these peppers fresh. I've given a ton of them away, but clearly there's a lot of peppers to deal with, and I'm super excited to put them away for the winter. So let's get going. It's heavy. This little multi-chopper here has been one of the best investments that I've made in our kitchen gadgets collection ever since we started growing a lot of our own food. If you need to chop a whole bunch of onions, a whole bunch of peppers, anything that you could ever want to dice a lot of, this is going to be really, really valuable. It comes with 2 different blade attachments. This one looks like at about a 1/2 inch dice, and this one right around a 1/4 inch dice. I haven't used a dice this small yet, but think about how much time you could save trying to cut up something that small. It also has this neat one that looks like it's an apple corer. So I'm gonna be using the 1/2 inch dice today. And the underside of the lid here has these little prongs that's gonna help push the food down through the blade. I'll show you. And it's got quite a large little catchment area down here that's gonna allow us to chop quite a lot all at once before we have to worry about filling the bag. It's a pretty simple process, but I like to preserve as much of the pepper as possible. So I am gonna be cutting the top off like so, but I'm also going to be pushing out the stem. I will feed this part to the pigs, and I'm going to put this through the chopper. And it's that simple. All I'm doing is making sure that my pepper pieces are small enough to make sure that they fit on this approximately 4 inch by 4 inch square here, so that when I push down, none of the peppers are being smushed on the side instead of being diced and then placed in the container below. Now that we're pretty much full to the top in our little chopper here, I'm gonna pour what's in here into a Ziploc bag. I think this was about 12 peppers to get around half a bag. Not too shabby, and it didn't take me any time at all. These are nice even dice. If you wanted to, you could lay these peppers out on a cookie sheet in one layer and freeze them that way and then put them in the bag. If you did that, they'd be a little bit easier to get out of the bag in certain portions. I don't find that it's a really big deal. Peppers don't really have a ton of moisture, so when they do freeze in the bag just like this, they don't really stick together too badly, and just tapping the bag on the counter loosens them up enough to where I can portion them out for all kinds of things like omelets, pizzas, casseroles. One of our favorite dishes is unstuffed peppers. You basically make the stuffed pepper stuffing with the rice and the meat and the seasonings and all that. Put in some sauteed green peppers, add some cheese, put it in the oven, and it is so, so good. So I'm gonna get the rest of this bag filled up, shove it in the freezer, and then we'll get to making Cowboy Candy. Oh, and just in case you're wondering how to clean this thing, it's actually quite easy. This little tray slides out, and it comes with this neat little cleaning tool, so I'll run it under hot water and just use the tool to free up any of the peppers that are in there. It's a lot easier under running water, but that's how it works. Hey guys, so it's the next day and it's time for me to make the Cowboy Candy. Levi just described to me that Cowboy Candy is a lot like a spicy bread and butter pickle. I make this for him because I don't like anything really remotely spicy. I guess I do like the salsa that we make, but that's about the extent of it. So just to give them a little bit of inspiration, what do you like to eat this on?
Cowboy Candy goes well on hamburgers, in burritos, on scrambled eggs, pretty much on anything that you would put pickles or relish on, and anything that you might want a little extra heat, but also with a little bit of sweet.
The flavor works well, the sweet and spicy, kind of a lot like a chocolate dipped pretzel. Pretzels aren't spicy.
No, but salty and sweet.
The idea is the same.
Sweet and spicy. They just work together.
Awesome. I'll make sure to list all of the recipes for the things that I'm doing today in the description box below. I will let you know that I am doubling the quantity of peppers that I'm putting in the Cowboy Candy recipe today, but I'm not going to be doubling the brine. I find that the brine recipe that comes with really makes too much. In fact, I have canned some of the brine in years past, and if I feel like I need extra brine, I know I've got it with these. So I have 8 pounds of sliced jalapenos over here. I'm gonna be doing 3 cups of ACV. You can use regular vinegar too. 4 cups of sugar. 2 teaspoons of salt. Calls for 6 cloves of garlic. I'm gonna use garlic powder. I'm gonna do 1 teaspoon to replace each clove. So 6 teaspoons. 2 teaspoons turmeric. 2 teaspoons mustard seed. And a half teaspoon of cayenne. I'm gonna bring this up to a boil and get all the sugar dissolved before we add the jalapenos. Now it looks like an awful lot of jalapenos for the amount of liquid that was in there. And it may be that I need to add this extra brine that I have over here, but the jalapenos cook down quite a lot. I do know a couple. Also, as they boil, the capsaicin kind of gets in the air, so keep your face away from it. They do tend to boil down quite a lot. I know a couple people who have done what's called a raw pack with their Cowboy Candy, meaning that instead of cooking down the jalapenos like the recipe says for 15 minutes, they actually will just add the raw jalapenos straight to the jar and then put hot brine on top of them and can them that way. Unfortunately, while they're in the canner, those jalapenos that went in raw will shrink up a lot and you kind of waste a lot of your space in your jar. So this part is definitely worth doing so you get the most out of it. They'll cook down quite a lot and the jalapenos should sink down below the brine. Okay, so our Cowboy Candy has been simmering for 15 minutes. The jalapenos have significantly wilted down. And now it's time to pack the jars. I'm using a slotted spoon to pack in the jalapenos first, and then I'm going to follow up with the brine. I did tamp down the jalapenos a little bit. Everything is in there relatively snugly, but it's not like it's smashed down in. Now that all the jars are packed with jalapenos, I've got to go back through and top them all off with the brine. The recipe directions say that we should keep the contents of the jar at a 1/2 inch headspace. And what that means is the air space between the food and the top of the jar, or the lid of the jar, should be a 1/2 inch. No more, no less. They actually make a neat little tool for determining your headspace. This is the Headspace tool and debubbler that comes with a lot of canning kits. And if I was to take the food down to this notch, this would be 1/4 inch headspace. But what I'm aiming for is a 1/2 inch here. So I'm gonna set this stair step down on the edge of my jar. And it's fine if the food touches it a little bit, but I just really don't want to have any major discrepancy in my headspace. Everything looks good. We're at the point in the process now where I need to make sure all of the rims of these jars are completely clean. So I'm using white vinegar with a cloth and just making sure that there's no extra sugar solution or pepper seeds or anything on the rim of the jar, because if that kind of thing exists there, it's gonna compromise the seal. Nice and clean. It's really important when you're canning that you don't over tighten your lid. During the canning process, you're creating a vacuum. And while the jars are hot, they're going to be releasing some of the air that's inside. So you need to be able to provide a little bit of wiggle room so that air can escape, but not so much wiggle room that the jar won't seal as it cools down. So we like to call it, in the canning world, fingertip tight. And basically, it's just like that. You don't want to crank down on it, but you need it to be tight enough where all the things that need to happen can happen. Essentially, once you're able to spin the jar by itself, by the ring, give the band just another 1/4 turn, and that's tight enough. I'm going to be using my favorite canning method to can up the Cowboy Candy today, and this is my steam canner. A steam canner is an approved method for canning all of your acidic foods, just like water bath canning, but it's a lot less water that you have to use. It takes a lot less time, and if you do happen to have seal failures, it's a lot less heartbreaking. I'm gonna be videotaping a whole steam canning 101. Look out for that video pretty soon. So I won't go through all of the ins and outs of the steam canner today, but just know that I love it. The steam canner has a little gauge at the top here that lets me know when I am up to temperature. So now that the steam canner is up to temperature, I've set my timer for 15 minutes. And for a little bit of added security, I like to weight down the lid because sometimes the steam inside makes the lid jiggle around a little bit. So that's what this is for. So good news, we got all of the Cowboy Candy jars to seal, but one of them took a little bit longer to seal, and I'm not sure if the seal is going to be a long-lasting one, like what you're looking for. And one of the ways that I can tell that is by the sound. So I wanted to share that with you. This is the one that I don't think has a good seal. Do you hear how much more high-pitched that one is? This one is a lot more normal. There's something not right here. I believe that there isn't as tight of a vacuum, so there could have been a compromise in the seal. Both of these jars currently have the rings around them still. I don't store my jars this way, so we're gonna see how strong this seal really is. So this is the good seal. This is the good one. With any good seal, you should be able to pick the jar up by the lid and have it not come off. Good seal. Here's the one that's bad. So it is staying on, but I would bet if I kept this on my shelf like that, any kind of temperature fluctuation, like it's really hot here right now, it can get 80 degrees in my house and probably even warmer up above on my cabinets where I store a lot of my canned food. So I am going to elect to reprocess this jar with the pickles that I'm about to do. And some of you who are canning experts may have caught it, but I actually forgot to debubble these jars. What that means is I should have taken a skewer or my debubbling tool that I showed you and gone around the inside of the jar to make sure that I freed up all of the extra air that inevitably gets caught in between the peppers. Having failed to do that meant that my headspace actually wound up being incorrect. You can probably tell that the brine level in this jar is actually pretty low, and that's not because any of the brine came out of the jar, just more of the bubbles that were trapped in here came to the surface and messed up our seal. So learn from my mistakes. Try to remember to debubble. Oftentimes when you're filming something that you've done a million times, you forget some steps. This is gonna be the fun part. I really like pickling pretty much everything. I have a favorite dill pickle brine that I can make from scratch. Unfortunately, I couldn't get any of my dill to germinate well this year, so I don't have any fresh dill heads right now. Dried dill just is not the same to me, so for convenience sake, I picked up one of these Mrs. Wage's pickling packs. When you do as much from scratch as we do, sometimes you like to cut yourself a break, so you have my permission to do so as well. This requires 9 to 11 pounds of pickling cucumbers. You can really use basically any vegetable. 3.5 cups vinegar, 7 1/3 cups water, and one of these pouches. So I'm gonna get that in the pot. It's not a day in the kitchen with me if I haven't spilled something on the floor at least twice. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to fill up all 7 quarts that brine will cover, but just in case I am able to, I'm going to put 1/4 teaspoon of this pickle crisp. It's just calcium chloride in the bottom of each jar. And what this is going to do is basically help ensure that our pepper pickles remain as crisp as they can be. Sometimes when you heat process certain vegetables, especially maybe some that are a little bit thinner walled than others, this just helps them maintain as much of that crispness as they can. If you'd like to maintain a nice crisp pickle without the use of something like Pickle Crisp, you can absolutely try a low heat processing method for your pickles. Essentially what you do is you heat up your jars in a boiling water bath canner to 180 degrees, and I believe you maintain the heat for 30 minutes. It's a lower temperature than boiling, so in theory, you aren't going to cook your vegetables as much. I have issues with my jars sealing when I use that method, so I choose to use the Pickle Crisp. Another good tip for pickling is if you are going to be pickling any vegetables that have been kept in the refrigerator, you're going to want to leave them out on the counter covered at room temperature until they come to room temperature, because when you add your brine into the jar, if it's on top of cold vegetables, it's going to cool your brine down and could potentially crack your jar. And if it doesn't crack your jar, pouring the hot brine over the cold vegetables, it very well could still crack the jar inside the canner. So try to bring your veggies up to room temperature if they're not already there. I'm gonna do what I didn't do before, which is debubble the jar. So you can use that debubbling tool like I showed you, or you can use a skewer. This is a wooden chopstick. I would advise against using something like a butter knife. You could inadvertently chip the edge of your jar, and that would be really sad, because if you chipped really any part of your jar, it's basically unusable for canning. So all I'm doing is kind of just poking around inside the jar, around all the edges, releasing all those trapped air bubbles. And in doing so, I am kind of ruining the headspace that I established before, but that's okay. I can just make up with it with extra brine, and things should just work beautifully. I'm actually electing to add more peppers to make up the headspace, because it does seem like I have the room in there to do that. That pepper that I just ate is supposed to be a heatless habanero. I can assure you that if it was a full-blown habanero, I'd be on the ground crying right now. But that was not heatless per se. Here's another one. They're not heatless. They're not crazy, like they're not even as warm as a jalapeno, but a kid would notice that, for sure. Canner's all loaded, and it has the exact same canning time as the Cowboy Candy. So I'm gonna put the lid on, bring it up to temp, and then let it do its thing for 15 minutes. As you could probably tell, there wasn't any space in there for my extra jar of Cowboy Candy that didn't seal quite right, so I just stuck it in the refrigerator and we'll eat it soon enough. Now we can breathe a sigh of relief. For now, pepper processing is all done. But it's not all over yet. We are still bringing in pounds and pounds of other food, including tomatoes. If you haven't seen our tomato processing video yet, I'm gonna put that up here. And I also wanted to let you know that in years past, I have done fermented hot peppers before to make fermented hot sauce. Very, very delicious. We made so much last year that I don't have to make it this year. But if you're interested in seeing that process, go ahead and click that video.